Good afternoon. I'm Marilee Utter, Chair of the Counselors of Real Estate. Welcome to Confessions of a Developer, today's session in our ongoing series of What's Next webinars. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Counselors of Real Estate, we're a 70-year-old professional organization for leading property advisors around the globe. Experienced, innovative, and credentialed problem solvers. Counselors practice, our members practice in 21 countries, over 60 real estate disciplines, and advise most of the US-based Fortune 500 companies. Membership is by invitation only. All members have earned the prestigious CRE designation. If you'd like to learn more, please look at our website, cre.org. And also, if you're interested in getting a free subscription to our excellent publication, Real Estate Issues, cre.org/publications. Top-level programming that the counselors do is really possible only by our sponsors. So please help me in thanking Altus Group, Busak Real Estate, and Equus Capital Partners for their support throughout the year. We really appreciate it. Now, throughout our session, we really encourage you to ask questions. We're looking for interaction. It's kind of a hallmark of the counselors. So please use the question and answer feature on your computer to submit questions throughout, and then we'll be addressing them later in the program. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our host for today's session, Steve Navarro. Steve is president and CEO of the Furman Companies in Greenville, South Carolina. In that role, he oversees their efforts in both development and advisory services, where they work in 23 states, 4 countries, representing, advising, and investing alongside corporate, institutional, high net worth individuals, and public sector clients. Steve's a long-term CRE member and leader, and he also holds designations from CCIM and the Fellow in Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our panel and get us underway.
Thank you, Marilee, and thank you all for joining us today. I think we're going to have a lively conversation. We have a really fun, smart, hand-picked group of folks that we're going to try to delve deep with, and appreciate you joining us into this look inside maybe this well-known but also been a little bit mysterious industry. Not one that we spent a lot of time talking about or kind of investigating. Staff entitled this program Confessions of, but I think this is probably a little bit more akin to musings of a small-scale developer. In some communities, the word developer can be a bad word, and I don't think we want to do anything that requires a confession or admit to it, especially in this Lenten and Easter season. So we'll just call it musings of small-scale development. It's a 1-hour session. We're going to get into the world of that type of development and also the minds of small-scale developers. We want to try to go fast. I'm hoping to go deep. When I complete introductions, I'm going to put out a question or two, and then I hope this will become very conversational with the panelists so we can kind of get raw information and make this as unscripted as possible. And I've encouraged them to do that. I'll present a subtopic and we'll just let them roll with it. Along the way, if you have questions, I think you've got a dialogue box or a Q&A box that you can jot your questions into. Marilee's going to help me sort through those, and then we will leave enough time to get some questions and try to answer all those. I do also want to point out this is not small-scale development 101 for rookies. We're not going to spend a lot of time on introductory icebreakers like how did you get into the industry and why. And we only have an hour. I'll take the liberty to assume that if you've read bios, you're interested in these folks, and so you already have done that, or you already know something about these participants. So my introductions are going to be fast. They're going to be limited to product and region and give you just a little bit of sense of what each one works on. Before I do that, I think it's probably a pretty good idea to try to define what actually a small-scale developer is. Because if you're in New York City and you're defining what a small-scale developer is, it's different than if you're in Main Street, USA. Maybe the easiest way to do that first is, instead of trying to peg a market size or project size or type, is to tell you what small scale is not. Small scale is not a big development company churning out generic product. They're not typically limited to a specific property type, and they're not inflexible in their pursuits. The pursuits might be more dependent upon relationships and timing and reacting to opportunities or needs or a community or even a user. So most small-scale developers do not use institutional capital, and that's a really big part of this, I think we talked about. Most do not have the luxury or actual leverage using fully non-recourse debt, and that's something we're going to definitely explore a little bit about. Let me quickly tell you a little bit about my company. As a small-scale developer, I think partially to help establish perspective, but also I think might actually help define a lot of what small-scale developers are out there. So our mission statement is really simple and it's strict. We develop in markets we like to live in or visit. We partner with people we like and trust. And we develop product that we believe makes a positive, sustainable impact in the community. If it does not meet that criteria, we don't do it. Life's too short. We like to follow our passion, and we want to do it in markets we like. We do business in Asheville, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, and we love being in all of those markets, and we like the people. We're not one size fits all. Last month, we broke ground on a 200,000 square foot, $70 million well-certified Class A corporate headquarters. And we also, at the same month, started the rehabilitation of our fourth urban mixed-use historic restoration, positioning it as urban lifestyle office. So we utilize new market tax credits, historic tax credits, state abandoned building credits, and we form QOS. We like to think of ourselves as opportunistic, as most small developers do, and at the same time fill needed market niches, hoping to be additive to communities. Don't know where they show on your screen, but I'm going to go through how they show on mine. Christina Camp is with us today. She founded Avalon Group over 20 years ago. I think I've known Christine for probably 10 years. She's based in Hawaii. Avalon is developing almost 200 acres of industrial land in Oahu, which is a little bit like owning a gold mine in that market. I know I've done some industrial work there. It's not easy. So to be a developer there is quite interesting. She's also extensively involved in multifamily development near Honolulu, and she'll gladly, I'm sure, tell you more about all of that. Alex Rose is head of development for continental development in South LA County, Los Angeles, where they're one of the largest landowners and also developed about 5 million square feet of buildings just south of LAX. They develop primarily for their own account, but also with select partners. Alex is also a past small-scale development chair for the Urban Land Institute. And finally, Louis Stirling founded Stirling Properties, most recently Stirling Capital Advisors. He has extensive history of developing in retail and office and product in the Gulf South, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. And he's done so for himself and his partners. And one of the things I've always been impressed with Louis is the loyalty that his users express to him as he takes them from market to market. So we can talk a little bit about that as well. So with that, let me get the conversation started. And I'm going to start with a sort of a softball question that they can all talk about. And I'm going to start with you, Christine. Christine, in your opinion, what makes what you do unique and important to a community? And why is that a benefit to a more local and local?
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for that introduction. Being in Hawaii, it's an isolated market because we're not connected to the rest of the states. So what I do, I try to, as a small developer, we have a lot more flexibility in what we do. And given that we are smaller, what we try to do is to be in areas where not everyone is chasing the same product type. What we do is we fill gaps, and that's what we pride ourselves in. We know our community well. We live here. We shop at the same places. We go to work at the same places. We have kids that are going to the same schools as our target market. And being in a community that is that small allows us to understand where the gaps are. And as a small developer, we're not limited by the size. A lot of the larger developers have to look at mega projects to make it work. And for us, even if it's a $10 million project or even a $3 million project, we would be able to participate to fill the gaps. So, and we can go into that further, but that makes us, we feel very proud in being able to do projects maybe some developers may not be able to do. For example, we just finished a $180 million condominium project. In it had affordable housing, rental housing that has never been built in that particular community for over 30 years. We were the first. We're building a school. Some of the larger companies may not be able to build a school for a lower margin. We can, and we're very proud of it. Things of that nature. So that makes us very nimble.
Quickly dispel the myth that small scale developers work on small deals. It's not that. It's certainly something else. Alex, same question.
I would pick up on both, Steve, your mission and description of the firm and company and what drives you, as well as Christine's point about the focus on knowing a market and being integral to that market. We're different in that we grew up on a single product type, mostly office for and R&D space for the aerospace and defense industry going back to the 50s. Made our reputation on that in the community over a 60-year period. And then have been able to do, again, a lot of the opportunistic, decide what we want to do, not be forced to do what we want to do, types of decisions that both you and Christine described. And, I too would reframe the quote unquote small scale label. For us, a project can be repositioning of an existing asset that is, as little as adding some common space and a patio for a few $100,000 to the deal that we just closed, which is a $250 million build-to-suit development for the Los Angeles Chargers practice facility and headquarters here in El Segundo, and everything in between. And all of those projects across that spectrum, from big to small, have all the same components and community ties that both of you alluded to.
Glad you mentioned that about the Chargers, because even though this is a small scale session, that seems like a really large scale deal. It's being done by a small scale developer. And I do at some point later in this conversation. So I want to circle back to that because I think a lot of people are going to want to hear about that. How the heck that happened. Louis, same question, your opinion. What makes what you do unique?
Well, flexibility, you mentioned that, Steve, and we've been unique in our market, and actually we're sort of a unique, Stirling Properties is a unique company in that it truly is full service as a large brokerage operation, property management. We do a lot of third party, we do, consulting and I'm not trying to, talk about Stirling Properties, but it makes us unique because we have a menu of services and we're able to cycle with the real estate cycles. When it's time to acquire versus build, we usually are in the acquisition mode, and then if it makes sense to build certain products, and sometimes they're simultaneous, but we're nimble and we move across markets, and because of our brokerage group, we represent a lot of tenants, and we're able to develop relationships with them, but we stick to a geography, which you mentioned, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Panhandle of Florida, not all of Florida, and we try to be the guys to go to in that geography. And we early in our company's history, we decided, we could either just do shopping centers everywhere or just do real estate where we could dominate the market and dominate the market knowledge and contacts and that type of stuff. So we started as shopping center developers. We are predominantly doing today you would say how many shopping centers you're building. I'd say 0. and I would, you'd ask me how many, medical emergency rooms and MRI centers and hospital renovations, I'd say 6 or 8. And then I'd say, but we also rework our existing assets. I think Alex mentioned that we always are circling back and redeveloping and retooling and, all of our, so we're that makes us unique. And we're kind of go-to guys in the community. I mean, I guess part of the question is why does it matter? Well, we in our community, we're the economic development department. They all have the governmental division, and they call us up and say, hey, we really want to get Target in our city. We were told you're the guys. And so, we know what the city needs and we know what the tenant needs, and sometimes they match and sometimes they don't, but we're really frank with them and
Relationships really help you plug in and see how it's
important there. So anyway, I'll jump off.
So that introductory question, actually, it captures really why I really wanted these 3 on our program. We have Alex working in a neighborhood. Now, granted, it's a big ass neighborhood. I think I can say that on national audience. It's a big ass neighborhood, but it's a neighborhood. And then you've got a guy who is doing business across multiple states, small scale developers, both. And then you've got a lady who is on an island, literally on an island, working on an island, and as a small scale developer, but doing really cool and significant projects. So my next question, and Alex, I'll start with you. Consider, as a small scale company, what you might do more effectively that a larger institutional developer might struggle with or would have more difficulty achieving success with.
I think, Steve, it really comes down to almost a single word, which is flexibility. Our ability to make our own decisions, to not be answerable to stakeholders other than, really the community and the market and ourselves. I think that's, as much as anything, distinguishes us from the institutional players. We have the good fortune, frankly, of partnering recently with an institutional office developer on a new project. And it's been interesting to me to see where we went into the deal knowing that both of us culturally and objective wise and mission wise had almost perfect alignment. This is a public REIT. It has a size and a bureaucracy, if you will, that is very different than ours, but very much long-term holder, best-in-class type of objectives. And what has struck me in that partnership is just the different ways which we, as opposed to them, go about making decisions and process and whatnot. I think the good news is that from the mission and the cultural alignment will supplant all that, but it has been a bit of an education for me, for somebody who for 30 some odd years has worked in an environment where, as I like to say, we do whatever the heck we please. And, if we fail, we fail. If we don't, if we succeed, we succeed. If we hit a target, if we even figure out what the target is in advance, great. If we don't even want to do that, which is probably more often than not, if we're having a good time and doing good work, that's what drives us.
So you make an interesting observation that you're doing a deal with a large institutional partner and your interests are aligned and that everything is going great. Let's footnote that or bookmark that and come back to maybe a question later is what happens when a small scale developer does this with an institutional investor, maybe it's providing equity or girth and your interests aren't aligned at some point in the project, and what happens to the small scale guy. Lewis, same question.
Hi.
What can you do more effectively than an institutional developer might struggle with?
Well, I'm going to steal Alex's word, flexible, and add nimble to it, which is not much different. But we have a obviously a depth of market knowledge that someone from afar would never have. We, to the point of property specific knowledge, we will get, and that shortcuts due diligence. We'll get a phone call. We're not a spec developer. We develop for a reason, and so that's just what we've always done. And so if a client, whether it be medical or retail or office or whatever, calls us and says, look, I really want a new home or a new additional home or additional whatever, and they say, I want to be here, we usually can tell them in 10 minutes, okay, it's not going to take you 3 months, it's going to take you 3 years, and these are your hurdles. Do you want to do it? And if the answer is yes, then they know, and we know, and we all kind of take a deep breath and start the heavy lifting, and we can do that much better than I've seen institutional developers from afar that come in and they get bounced around and they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and they're getting nowhere, other than frustrated, and we can cut through that quickly.
I'm sure.
Hey, Louis, do you find there's a backside to that, right? Which is sometimes you know too much.
Oh yeah.
And it means that there's a bypassed opportunity where you go, I really should have not relied on my knowledge as much.
Yeah, there's always that. And the good news is the way we were, way we operate as Stirling is, there was basically 4 partners, and we were all like really different, and we all brought different things to the table, and one guy in the room's going, oh no way, that's just, I'm not waiting, and the other guy's going, oh wait, we can do this, I know so and so, we can figure out how to do this, and so we sort of balance each other out. But yeah, you can get caught in the I know too much trap, and anyway,
Well, if you get in trouble though, knowing too much gets you out quicker though.
Exactly.
But it also, as Louis said, it gets you to a decision much quicker and a pathway much quicker too, without having to sit down and go through 25 pages of checklists.
Yeah.
Christine, you're in a very confined area that a lot of money is trying to get into from an investment standpoint. So maybe this question is the same, or maybe it's different for you.
Actually, I want the answers are pretty much the same, ditto and ditto, but I'd like to add a little more layer to what makes small developers more successful, or the nimble. What does that mean? And so, for example, I have institutional partners as well as friends and family type of projects. It all depends on the size of the project that we have. And I can tell you that institutional partners will have a decision making process that requires a committee. It requires, a certain level of attorney review. That means hundreds of thousands of dollars of review. Whereas we can go through that, cut through all of that, just like Louis has said, and be able to get to a decision making relatively quickly. So what we've been able to do is to tie up a property, because we know that due diligence will pass muster, but our institutional partner can't get there. And we can acquire it or be ready to acquire it. And then so by the time they're done, we already gone through the competitive process. And now it's all about timing and competition. So in this case, the side that Alex is saying, sometimes you know too much, knowing too much can get you to a place much faster. Right. So we can make that commitment. And our view is, okay, we make the commitment, and if our partners can't come through, can we close on our own? And after 20 years of doing this, for us, we basically can say that, yes, we can. We just have to come up with friends and family monies or, personal funds and guarantee. You'd actually have to do recourse debt, but you can still do that, right? So what can we do better? We can be far more competitive because we can get there much faster.
Right.
So you've led right into kind of the next topic and area that I want to talk about, which is access to capital, and just better understanding if it's a challenge for you, is it a limitation? On the flip side, does it free you up? So let's talk a little bit about that. Maybe, Christine, maybe you can continue in that. I mean, I can tell you, and maybe we are doing confessions. because I'm about to confess something. I have never done a deal with an institutional capital provider. And the main reason I've never done is because when I go into a development project, how we go in, when we go in, and when we get out, I want ultimate decision making. So I will do friends and family, or I'll do it on my own investment, but I am that decision maker. And that's kind of my rule number one and my last rule. I can never get that with an institutional partner. So I just like to just stay out of that arena.
Well, you know what helped me, Steve, is the poison pill theory, right? I mean, if you have aligned, you may want to make sure that everyone's aligned with you. And institutional partnership is exactly that, because they're much larger, the decision making is much larger, and they have a different perspective of timing for how long you keep a property. And in real estate, things can take its own path. And even the best laid plans, I've never seen a project that met exactly down to the timing and down to this the project's budget. Oftentimes the rising tide of a market helps you out. And in cases where there's an institutional partner who has a specific timing for exit, what do you do if you want to keep that asset?
Sure.
So I always make sure that in our joint venture documents allows us a buyout, so that we can control that timing and give them the return that they need. But it is a very important aspect of it, Steve, because if you can't, you really, the community that you've built, the commitments that you've made to the community, sometimes, you can lose that credibility if you're following the rules of the institutional investor.
Just where are you getting your capital?
Mostly friends and family, but we have had we started out just friends and family, and then we, the circle has grown and friends of family, and so, but we do have a couple of institutional partners. We own 2 hospitals in a joint venture with the hospital, and then we have an insurance company partner who's a relatively small insurance company that acts like friends and family, and they never want to sell, and they're wonderful. And then we're in the middle of working with a new sort of institutional partner on an apartment development that it's a different type of partner for us. They're fall into the IRR, let's hit our hurdles and go kind of mentality. But
do you bristle a little bit when they call you and tell you that things have changed on their end?
Well, we're deep in the we haven't even broken ground, so we're deep in the process of setting the rules to the game, and so it's different. Just going through the paperwork with them has been a bit of a challenge, and I like Christine says, there's a lot of first rights of refusals and buyouts and lots of things like that because we just soon hold it forever, and but we'll sell if the right guy comes in with a 3 cap, it's gone. So yeah.
It's you guys are pretty much self-funded, and I think you're not beholden to necessarily institutional capital.
Right.
Do you feel like that gives you guys in LA in a very, very sophisticated, difficult market, a higher level of controlling your own destiny?
Oh, there's no question. To sort of broaden that story, I mean, the reason that we're so self-sufficient goes back to that 60 years of being here. So we've got an asset base that, keeps on giving, if you will. And the company over its history has been fairly conservative on debt levels. So, you've got tremendous cash flow that enables us to basically say, we don't have to go get institutional capital partners. And, I don't know that anybody, quote unquote, dictates what a lender is going to do, but, having just gone through this major financing that we did, I think all of us were a little bit surprised, even at the extent of that financing, how much we were able to dictate to the capital provider terms and conditions that were going to work for us and for for that development deal, there's no question, and I think Christine alluded to it, Steve, that our reputation within the market and ability to execute, because people know that we don't have to go to an investment committee, to go to a lender's investment committee, to be able to say, we will close with cash, we'll be able to close with a loan that comes in right on top of it, whatever we commit to. The reputation allows us to a huge competitive advantage over very often, the very same institutional players that you would go, oh, this guy's going to be able to walk into this market and, they've got a way bigger checkbook than we do. And, they're going to be able to smoke us on a deal. And more often than not, it doesn't happen that way.
Tell me about, and staying with equity, and then we're also going to move into debt. Are any of you doing any spec development?
We are.
We are. It's very specific though.
So hit real quick, because I know oftentimes when we talk about our spec development, we want to explain it. But hit real quickly in the spirit of what we've just talked about. Do you look at those differently in terms of where does your equity come from? And then I do want to transition this conversation into debt as well.
We don't. I mean, it's adjacent to our holdings. It's critical mass. We've got the capability. We didn't have to bring in a partner. We chose to for some reasons. But we've always been a spec developer, and that's also the nature of this particular market. It's a build it and they will come type of market, not a pretty picture one.
And predominantly having all of those assets under one kind of ownership entity, all you're really doing is slightly expanding the pie of vacancy in a time when you can absorb it.
Correct.
Yeah. Christina, what about you?
Yeah, we don't have the luxury of doing spec builds because financing wise, you really need to validate it by the market. But like Alex had alluded that we're in a market specifically, let's say that it's industrial. We wouldn't be doing spec on high rises, for example, unless you had pre-sales. But apartments and industrial, we've done that on spec, and we're actually have 2 on the books now for doing spec builds.
You have a harder time raising equity?
Equity is not the problem. It's usually, do we want to go into debt and want it to be full recourse during the construction? But when you're in a small market where whether you sign recourse or not doesn't matter, because if you want to be in a smaller market and be a dominant player, you have to make commitments to your lenders, and you're not walking away.
You are the perfect panelist for me to go last, because you have transitioned into every one of my next thoughts. Now let's talk about debt. One of the big differentiations, and I mentioned this as in the introduction, we do not always have the luxury of going into a leveraged transaction with fully non-recourse debt. Most small-scale developers are defined as at-risk developers. And in fact, if you go into a small-scale development council at ULI, kind of the brotherhood or sisterhood and the brethren of group, very much is, we're here making decisions with our butts on the line. We're signing those loans. We're doing our best to get off of it as quick as we can, or to parse that out. But we are making that risk, and it's different. So tell me about different.
Did you mean me? So so on recourse, why it's different is that industrial, usually private equity, they will not sign recourse, right? I mean, they would rather put in more equity than recourse. But for small scale developers who are partnering with the equity, because it's IRR driven, like Lewis had said, the more equity you put in, it dilutes the small scale developers portion of profits interest. And so we wouldn't want that. We rather borrow more. And what ends up happening is that we would have to sign recourse because private equity won't. So we would sign the equity, the debt
So
recourse.
Christine, on your deals where there's no institutional partner, where you're you friends, family, and it's a debt deal.
But it has to burn off, right? I mean, of course, you're going to allow for some level of recourse when there's higher level of risk. And so, yes, I've done it, and I don't hesitate doing it at all for the right price of debt and right size of debt. The higher level of debt leverage you go, of course we will, but it would have to burn off as the risk goes abated, as the project gets more mature.
signing?
I would say ground up development, we're always, on the hook. We have to sign the construction loans. But we usually negotiate with the lenders up front, okay, during construction, it's non-recourse insolito between all the partners, never the investors, just the developer. And that's why we get a promoted interest for signing the debt. And then that's one of the main reasons. But as soon as it goes into stabilized income, it shifts to either pro rata amongst the partners, or maybe pro rata plus 10% of your piece, or we negotiate, and then we may negotiate once it gets to debt coverage ratios at certain points. It drops down instead of 100%, 110% of the loan to maybe 75% of the loan or 25%. We negotiate whatever we can negotiate to get out of it as fast as possible. And then usually we at the first refinancing, when that loan comes due, we go to non-recourse at that point as fast as
It's
possible.
easier to do too, because you're going to hold it long term. When
Yeah.
you have recourse debt and you've got partners,
Right.
and a lender will oftentimes, I'm sure they will for you, apportion that and say, you're all guaranteeing, let's say you're guaranteeing the top half of the debt, and it's going to be 25% for 4 partners. Do you have also in your partnership agreement that says something that you'll balance each other out, or you'll
Yes.
equalize each other? Because lenders rarely will say,
Yeah.
and I'll only go after each of you proportionately.
Yes. We have an agreement amongst ourselves where we basically are responsible for our piece, so.
Alex, what's going on in LA with you?
Yeah, I mean, it because of our platform, Steve, the whole discussion really is a non-discussion. Everything that we have developed up until this point has largely been either off of just cash with a loan, against a stabilized asset, or the one project that we just completed, which is about 160,000 square foot campus up in the Marina Del Rey area, also spec, did have a construction loan on it. And again, it was back with a banking relationship that we have had for 30 some odd years. So yes, there is recourse, but we also had a ton of equity in the deal. So it's, I would readily admit we're a unique animal when it comes to the debt side.
Yeah, I mean, and you're putting existing assets against that also.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
so-
Right.
so-
Yeah. And most people
There's one
can do
person
that.
that to some degree is at risk. It's just a minimal risk.
Correct.
I know we're doing I mentioned this office, lifestyle urban office, and we're doing this old ice cream facility. It's a really cool project. It's a $14 million project. It's all post-COVID office. We have no tenants. We believe in it. We did talk to a couple of banks about debt, and we looked at it, we thought, this is so onerous on us. We got to guarantee it anyway. So we just said, forget it. So I've got 2 partners. We wrote the check. We're going to build it, and we'll find tenants, and we'll come back in post like Lewis, what you said, and we'll put good long-term debt on it. We'll keep it for a long time. We actually put it in QOF.
Well, I mean, I'm probably going to help you segue into your next question, but when Alex is taking construction risk, even though, because he's putting all the capital in and as the construction lender to himself, and we try and, obviously when we start looking at risks and what loan we're signing, we try and mitigate that risk as much as possible and get the right kind of contractor who, if something goes bad, they're not just going to explode on us. They're going to be able to stand behind, a problem. And, whether that's because, they're just big, or because we bonded them, or whatever we have to do, we mitigate risks as well as you can through insurances and just and try and get it whittled down to the minimum amount you can accept, and go from there. And really the most risk we take is the ground up development. I mentioned before that we play in cycles. So we do a lot of acquisitions, and we normally, since we're not an IRR company, we'll put a lot of equity in just to not have to sign the loan. We'll do the bad boy provisions and that type of thing. But we're, our investors realize that, the more equity, the lower the return, because the lower the risk. So we're not about, 20% IRRs because they're not flipping. We're more about a balanced portfolio. Our portfolio.
I'm going to switch gears on you guys because I'm starting to look at my clock and I want to leave a bit of time for Q&A, but I do have a couple of more questions that I think are important for everyone to hear. Let's go 180 degrees. Let's talk about community impact. When you make decisions, when you decide to develop and you say these communities and these stakeholders, whether it's the politicians, the elected officials, or the influencers in that market, or just it's the community, people that you live in, the people your kids go to school with. How does that affect your planning and your decision making, and how do you make that work to your advantage? Community impact.
For us, it is everything. It is. We had a perfect example in both the Chargers development entitlements and a major residential project that we are entitling for an owner that just got approved by council last week. And in both instances, it was not only our sense of how the projects were going to fit in the community, but our sense of how the council would and the community would react to the development, because it was a continental development, as opposed to somebody else coming in with that same exact project. And I would tell you, Steve, that there is not anything that we do, from repositioning existing assets to leasing decisions to community engagement decisions to entitlements to acquisitions, dispositions, where we're not thinking about how it fits into the two primary communities where we're active. It is everything.
Christine, you can't go to the grocery store without running into your tenants and partners and lenders. So how does community impact fit with you?
So our decision making is impacted by what our community wants, and that is our number one goal. So I can tell you that when the alignment wasn't there with our partner on an agricultural project where we believe that the community wanted nothing more than 50 lots in a 2,300 acre property, and our partner wanted far more, we actually walked from the deal and asked them to buy us out because we believe that that wasn't for the community. Well, 15 years later, they're still trying to develop it. So, it just gives to that you need to be, I'd like to say that small scale developers in their communities, we're the moral compass as it relates to communities' needs for our institutional investors. We're the moral compass for them because we know what our community needs.
Like that. Louis, any other comments on that?
I mean, obviously when it's a retail shopping center, I mean, we're tenant driven, and so architecturally and land, and just, we're real sensitive to the architectural landscaping, just traffic patterns, everything. But when it comes to tenant mix, we do a lot of asking of neighbors. Well, what do you think you need? What do you want? What do you, what type of tenants do you, we're going to bring this tenant here. What do you think? And we get a lot of good feedback, and it helps us lease. And we'll do surveys and get data, and we can take that and say, look, boom. And the tenants, it helps us lease actually. Anyway, it's good.
So what I'm hearing all of you say is small scale developers are generally more plugged into their community, they're influencers of their communities, and they know the influencers within the communities. They understand comprehensive planning, and by kind of being plugged in and caring about that market, you have the opportunity to create or maybe see an opportunity and create that vertical process of development sooner than maybe someone else can, and see that through continued ownership. And that's a large part of a sustainable development.
I built the Fresh Market, which is probably the only two-story Fresh Market in America. And I had the ability to, it was in the Garden District on St. Charles Avenue, and I had the ability to tear the building down, which was an old historic building. And we made the decision, I made the decision, I'm not tearing it down because I'd have to move out of town if I did. You know, it was well known. It cost me probably 10%, 15% more to keep the building, but man, it's paid off in plenty of mileage with the planners, city, every historic people, everything. So anyway, it pays off.
The next question I have is I'm going to give you a little bit of a roll-up on it. I contend that the majority of people in our real estate industry secretly want to be private developers in some sense. I said that to Marilee, and Marilee laughed. I think people may not argue that out loud, but somewhere deep down inside, they thought, I wish I were a developer and in control of my own destiny. And I can underscore this point. It's because, I used to have a brokerage company, asset management company. Everybody would always come through and say, how do I get to become a developer? I had the honor of meeting not long ago our president of the United States, Joe Biden. At one point in the conversation, he literally pulled me close and said into my ear, I'll be honest with you. In my next life, I want to come back as a real estate developer in Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh my God.
So I contend that everybody just really wants to be a real estate developer, and a small scale with that because you're in control of your own destiny. So my question to you is on the personal side of this long career and journey. What are the benefits of being a small scale developer for you personally? And why is this lifestyle good for you?
For me, Steve, it is the opportunity. And again, I've been incredibly fortunate to be able to work off the platform that I do, because I think what it enables me to do is look at cities and opportunities and communities and, draw a conclusion that says this is a project that is, going to make the community better, that is fun to do, that is interesting, that nobody else can do or very few people can pull off. And, I've spent 30 years being able to wake up in the morning and say, that's the opportunity as a development professional that I'm going to go work on with, my internal teammates, my external teammates, and the community. And it's, for me, it's been the ultimate in, being able to be in the creative field. Again, the platform allows me to think really outside of the box where other people can't, because we have the resources, we have the ability to make those decisions for ourselves as whether you want to call it entrepreneurial platform or a small scale platform. And I can't think of a better, more personally rewarding element to it.
Well, your destiny, and there's a little bit of wealth accumulation, and you impact your community. Alex, do you love what you do?
I do.
Lois, same question, Lois.
Oh, yeah, I definitely love what I do. I like to create, and I like to build things. I like to impact the community and try and make the place I live and work a better place. And what we do, it hits a lot of buttons. It brings in taxes, it brings in jobs, it brings in amenities, it brings in beauty, it brings in interest, and that's kind of fun. I think it's a lot of fun, and you can I don't even care if anybody knows I did it. All I care about is I can drop by and look at it. In fact, I'd rather nobody know I did it. It would be I just get a lot
What would you do, Louis? What would you do, Louis?
Wait, I didn't hear you, but
Do you love what you do?
who, me? Of course. Christine, I think he's pitching to you now.
Christina, why is this
Yeah.
lifestyle
Well,
good for you?
So Steve, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I'm a first generation immigrant from and in American and lived in Hawaii most of my life. And I love Hawaii. And real estate has always been a interest for most of people in Hawaii who live there because only 5% of the land mass is allowed to be developed. It's urban. So, 22 years ago, I decided to start my own company, cashing out my 401k. I had $60,000 in my pocket. And what I did with that was use other people's money, leverage, to be able to secure a company now with 40 plus employees with an asset base and doing some major projects. You can only do that in real estate. And not only that, what Louis and Alex say and what you've been saying is right on. We can really make a difference in our community for the better. As much as there are a lot of people who poke holes at what developers do, we are actually solving problems of the community by building homes, places of work, adding tax base. And these are really significant things that we're doing in the community. And I feel so glad that I can do that and have doing that with making money for our investors, as well as doing some great things in the community. And so I wouldn't want any other job than doing what I'm doing now.
Hey, Steve, can I just tag on something to that real quick? So in the vein of making community better, the project that we just got approved, which was a residential 260 unit multifamily project. This city has not built multifamily in decades. It is the quintessential NIMBY. The only reason that we got involved in it was to effectively break the glass ceiling so that there could be more housing, so there could be better economic development. We wouldn't lose jobs. We would attract jobs, municipal revenues, lifestyle enhancements in the community. We may or may not ever be the developer for it. Didn't matter. It was about looking ahead and making the community a better place over the long run. Personally, that is as satisfying as anything I do.
We've talked about a number of different themes here, but the things that keep coming up are flexibility, being nimble, understanding a market, translating that into product, and staying with a product, owning it for long term, wanting to be in control of your destiny. These are all things that we've tried to talk about. What is a small scale developer? And these are the things that have come out. And I think if you don't mind me reading this one part, Christine, you said what I think is maybe the best way for us to define what is a small scale developer. You said, my decision making is impacted by what the community wants. And that's a big difference in what goes on in a lot of areas and a lot of big, more generic and big scale projects in other markets. So thank you for that. And thank all of you guys for a really interesting 55 minutes. I've left a little bit of time for Q&A, but I did want to thank all my panelists and all of you. In case you start to drop off, we'll bring you merrily back in. For all of you, I hope this gives you a brief inside look at and maybe a chance to better understand the world of small scale developers and what we do and how we approach things and the challenges that we face and possibly how we can benefit communities and how, if you're a developer, you can do the same in your communities. You all probably can add to that in your stories and how you've enriched your communities as well. And we invite this dialogue to continue on. And Marilee, I think, are we done in 6 minutes or can we stay on for a few more minutes for those who want to stay on?
You're muted, Marilee. Marilee, you're muted.
Zoom 2022, you're on mute.
Yeah, I know. I think you've got time for 2 questions.
Okay. Yours. Go ahead and shoot them at us.
Well, one of them, kind of following on the last line of conversation, is how involved are you guys with the politicians and the political process, given how tightly allied to the communities you are?
And Marilee, historically, we have been very tight. I mean, it's sort of what Steve was alluding to with Christine, where you go to the market, you go to the Kiwanis meeting, you go to the ribbon cutting, and you're there with decision makers, both at the elected level as well as the senior staff level in the cities. And to me, that's all about building on and building up that trust, so that when you actually do bring a project to the community, it's not an unknown entity. And I think in smaller, if you are developing in smaller communities like we are, as opposed to say a city of Los Angeles or a New York, Chicago, where there's a greater disconnect between you as a principal and those decision makers, it's more difficult. It is one of the real competitive advantages, as well as being essential in my mind.
Louis, do you have any response to that?
Yeah, we have managed that process over the years, I think, fairly well. But yes, we are well connected with a lot of politicians across multiple states. We try not to get involved in every race, if you will. But we'll support people but we try and limit our interaction to when we have a project, not the rest of,
In so many circles, having that relationship can be viewed as a bad thing, clandestine or something that is, and I would contend, especially in medium and smaller size markets, it's super important that you have those ties. I was telling one of you this, that we have the NCAA regionals or whatever they're called last week with Duke and Michigan State and USC and others. And I had a meeting Monday morning, and there were tons of people, or Friday, there were tons of people downtown. I was walking about 5 or 6 blocks back to my office, and people were out, and it was a beautiful day, and the flowers were going, and there was great smells and sights. And I texted the mayor of our city, and I just said, I love this city. And 3 minutes later, he had texted me back, and he said, right? Isn't it awesome? And he said, by the way, I need to get a chance to talk to you about ... And it was about an initiative that they've been talking about at City Hall. Those kinds of connections help make communities better.
And I will say this, we've got more mileage out of being community volunteers, which it actually allows you to meet politicians on a different basis than just fundraising. If you volunteer to be on a planning commission or volunteer to be on some other board, and I've done real estate consulting for the city of New Orleans off and on over the years, and you meet politicians that come and go and people in all different departments, and they know you on a professional level and not just you got some money from a barbecue ticket level, so.
Philanthropy.
What I found helpful, I'm sorry, Alex.
Just go ahead.
What I found helpful is that we're not just involved in politics, but we're involved in opinion making. I've decided that as a small scale, you don't have to report to a board or stockholders to offend anyone. So when I feel passionately about something, I write to the op-eds and really influence the decision making through the public process as well. Testifying, and so. Not only are we close to the politicians because we support them, we're close to them because they understand that we understand the issues and we can help them through those issues.
If I can take the conversation kind of a different twist, you guys have been terrific cheerleaders for the role and the passion and the satisfaction of small-scale development. Without the capital cushion that, say, an institutional organization has, what are the risks, that you wrestle with the most? Is it climate change? Louis, where you are, such an impacted area. Hawaii, obviously, there's big LA, all big issues for that. Is it supply chain? Is it entitlement? Is it inflation, interest rate? What do you worry about the most in keeping going?
All of the above.
Yeah, good answer. Yeah,
Universal problem.
yeah,
Well-
it moves with the year, so.
But I can tell you right now, what's really causing heartburn for me is the inflation, because we're building ground up, and my contractors can't seem to keep their pricing intact. So if our entitlement process takes a little bit longer than anticipated, those prices that they've quoted might change, and that for a ground up developer like myself is a very concerning.
One of the areas I think small scale developers are at risk a little bit, as to your question, Marilee, is especially with logistics, supply chain, and cost increases. As a small scale developer, we deal with contractors that are in varying size. We deal with huge contractors and we deal with small contractors. And one of the things we found is our small contractors do not have access to reliable sources of materials and ship dates and pricing. So we find ourselves migrating up to bigger contractors that can provide us guarantees so that our contracts with them are not at risk. And so that has been a difficult thing, I think, for smaller contractors to bear.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. We've been lucky in that we control a lot of land. We're not land speculators. It may be excess land to other developments, or I'm involved in a big land company in Alabama, and so we can be patient. We can tee up the entitlements, and we can but if the pricing's not right, we don't have to go. We can sit and wait, and our pursuit costs are there, but they're not wasted. But we can pick a better time when either the rents match the costs or the costs come down and match the rents or whatever. But we're kind of lucky in that respect. If I had to have land options and everything, I'd be a completely nervous wreck. And I would have to have long conversations with my landowners and say, hey guys, it's going to take 3 years to pull this off. And then limit my exposure there.
Well, then let me wind up with this question. I mean, all of you have been in the business for a long time, and you've got capital sources and capital of your own to work on. At the beginning, Steve said everybody wants to be a developer. Now, they all think they want to be. But how do you say someone really does want to get into the business and get started? How do you make that transition if you don't have a lot of your capital yourself?
I think you got to find, I have this conversation with undergrads and grads and recent grads all the time. And depending on their skill set and what they're interested in, my advice, Marilee, is always to try and replicate what I did. I got lucky coming out of an MBA program to be able to sign on to Continental when it was looking for somebody to do some entitlement work. I didn't even really know how to spell the word entitlement, but it was an opportunity to be able to say I had a business card that had the word development on it. And I think you look for those development firms, regardless of whether they're small scale or institutional, that have been successful in their own space, and they become this great higher education. And whether you evolve that into a platform like ours or like Steve's or Lewis's or Christine's, or become you're comfortable in a Brookfield or that kind of a setting. I think there's nothing better than just sticking your hand up and saying, I'm here are the 5 skill sets that I bring to the table. I know that they can be incorporated into development work that you are doing, and here's the value I can bring to the table. And you learn and you see where it's going to take you. And I don't know that there is a more set path than that.
Thanks.
Yeah, for someone who's already in the development field and wanting to be a developer, a small scale developer, I always recommend find the right project. If you find the right project, the money will follow.
Oh, great advice.
Yeah, oftentimes what developers will tell aspiring developers is if they don't want to go to work, kind of like take the shortcut or go to work for a small, for another development company, is you either have the money, you control the user, or you've got a really good idea before anyone else and you can leverage off of that. If you don't have one of those three things, you're not getting into the business.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of people looking at career change these days, and the mission and the role that you guys fulfill in communities is so important, particularly as we see the growth of the institutional developer. So I thank you all for the work you're doing. And I thank you all so much for joining us today. Steve, Christine, Lewis, Alex, it's great to see you all. And I really appreciate your candor and the insights that you were willing to share about it. For all of those who joined us, thank you. All the registrants for today's program will receive a recording of the webinar in your email, and on-demand versions are also available on our website. If you enjoyed it, please join us for our upcoming What's Next in Real Estate session on institutional investment. And that program is being done in partnership with Neighboring. Will be April 20th, about the same time of day. More details to follow. We've got your emails, so you'll be noticed about that. So until then, on behalf of the Counselors of Real Estate, thank you for joining us today.